Good morning and welcome. Could we ask you all to take your seats, please? On behalf of Beverly and Janie and Barbara, I want to welcome you here today to celebrate the life of Valmai Trembath-Brummel and to mourn her passing. For those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Leonard Whittaker and I'm Barbara Brummel's husband. And they've asked me to officiate in this morning's meeting and to make just a few introductory notes. Before we do that, a little bit of housekeeping. Can you please attend to your mobile phones appropriately? I know we all tend to forget those things. And make yourself comfortable. You should all have a copy of the Order of Service. If you open that to the middle, it will fairly much tell you what's going to happen today. In a couple of seconds, we'll get you to stand and we'll bring the casket in. So if we could do that now, if everybody could please stand. Thank you. Could you please take a seat? Beverly and Janie and Barbara asked me to specifically talk a little bit about the planning for this service. And it was their intent that the prime purpose of this service would be firstly to celebrate the life of Val, to secondly to assist all of us to mourn in our own passings. Because we all come from different faiths and sets of beliefs, it was really important to them that everybody who comes today can grieve in their own unique way from their own unique sets of circumstances. And I think that's a good epitome of Val's life. As her son-in-law, I had the privilege of driving her around from time to time. And they were pleasurable drives. I always enjoyed the time that we spent together because Val and I come from a different set of beliefs. It's the thing that we used to spend most of our time talking about. And one of the things I loved about her was in those discussions, despite the fact that from time to time we would find things that we'd agree to disagree on, the reality is that we always found more that we had in common than we had that was different. And that's really the story of her life, is her desire to build commonality and to connect with human beings. And that's one of the things that I loved about having a mother-in-law who, despite a difficult life, was still sensitive to the needs of others. If you'd like to turn to the order of service now, we will begin by having an opening song, O Work with God, after which Peter McGavin will give the opening prayer, and then we will have eulogies from, firstly Barbara, then Janie, then Dana McCaskill, and Beverly, and finally Rebecca. And then I will conclude with some following remarks. So if we could all turn to across the page, and if we could sing the song, O Walk with God. Thank you.
Our dear and loving and wonderful Father Jehovah, how sad it is to be here this morning, Father, as we commemorate our loving sister, Sister Val. Many of us know her, Father, for being just a bubbly personality and ever pleasant. Not any hard words or any harsh words were hardly spoken by her. She was always happy to meet new ones and to associate with everyone. So, Father, we gather here this morning. We think of the song just spoken and how it brought tears to many of us as we thought about Val and how happy she was to be alive and be associating with people and serving you too, Father, in a loving manner. So, Father, help us this morning and later on as we go home, the pressures that this world faces, and help us to overcome the morning and help us to get through the days after, because certainly we do miss Val and long to see her in the new world. So, Father, please be with her family and strengthen them It's certainly a miss when the mother dies and grandmother, and the list goes on, grandchildren. So Father, we ask that you help us to work together, help one another in times later, in even a year's time, Father, just a comforting word to one another to strengthen us, because we certainly live in this ungrateful world that we are. So please be with us all, and we thank you now and ask these many things in your loving Son and King, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you for that lovely prayer. For anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Val's youngest daughter, Barbara, known throughout my life as number 3. My father felt that numbers were more efficient than names and easier to remember. A few weeks ago, as Mum was failing, my sisters and I rostered ourselves around meal times because she wasn't able to feed herself, and we gave up our numbers and became breakfast, lunch and dinner instead. These last few weeks have been hard, but also very precious in many ways. I'm grateful to have been born to 2 good and decent people who, despite their own struggles and hardships, were committed to their marriage and to their family. They worked hard, they faced life with determination and humour, and one particular joke that none of us were ever old enough to hear. The sweetest childhood memories I have are of our annual family holidays, playing on the beach, fishing with Dad, in the caravan playing cards and board games, out in the little dinghy that he built himself, and leisurely drives and forays into nearby bakeries and newsagents to arm ourselves with essential holiday supplies. It was very exciting. Those were happy, safe, blissful times that were over and gone long before we had the sense to really appreciate them. I'm grateful for my 2 sisters. Obviously more than I can say. We have cried together a lot over the last few weeks, and I think our parents would be pleased that we've been able to come together and make a lot of important decisions without fighting or arguing or pinching or pulling each other's plaits. In times past, we would sometimes feel the sting of a damp tea towel when our differences got the better of us. And I used to call Mum the fastest tea towel in the West, which she didn't have to defend that title very often. And I don't really remember it, the sting of it, but I do remember the thrill of the chase. I am today especially grateful to my niece, Rebecca, Valmai's oldest granddaughter, who from the beginning of her life always had a special bond with Mum. Their birthdays were only a few days apart. They shared many similarities, and there was a sweet knowing and acceptance between them. As it turned out, Beck played a vital and significant role in Mum's passing. During her last visit with Mum, instead of going home at the regular time, she felt inspired to stay as long as she felt she was needed, which turned out to be all night, right up to the very end. With Beck's specialised training and skills in energy healing, she was able to guide her grandmother through her pain and distress and release and resolve many of her fears and regrets and long-held emotional wounds. In a very real way, she eased Mum's passing. There was a significant turnaround in Mum's level of stress. Those last few days had been really difficult. And it wasn't long before she quietly passed away. Although Beck's very humble and quiet about it, and really is probably not happy about me drawing attention to all of this, I want you to know that her selfless service provided something precious for Mum at a time when there was nothing further that could be done medically, and there was nowhere else to turn. This was a priceless gift, not just for Mum, but for me and for all of us who loved her. Having said all that, it is now my duty and privilege as the appointed family historian to paint you a brief picture of Valmai's origins and early life. I'm doing this without my glasses on, that's quite remarkable. Valmai was born to Richard Trembath and Clara Louisa Mitchell. And some of you knew Clara here today, so I think that's just lovely. Richard came from a family of boys and Clara came from a family of girls. All were from Cornish mining stock who emigrated to Australia in the 1800s to take advantage of the gold mining boom in Charters Towers, the Towers. They were people who were short in stature, but strong and hardy and suited to their difficult and dangerous profession. Hi, Nicole. Typical of the Cornish people, whose origins are quite different to most of England. They commonly had dark hair and dark eyes and were sometimes so dark-skinned that they would be mistaken for Spanish or Portuguese. So I had to learn that. I didn't know that. Cornish people are quite different and interesting. Many families in those days suffered bitter losses to mining accidents and the hardness of the life. Val had no grandparents on the Trembath side because her grandfather had been killed in a mining disaster. It was in the Columbia Charters Towers mine. Her father at that time was just 8 years old. Then when he was 15, his mother Annie also died. Richard worked then as a gold miner, and in 1916, in the middle of the Great War, he enlisted as a sapper in a tunnelling company. Of course, a miner would end up in a tunnelling company. He toiled in France on the Western Front, and although he was fortunate enough to make it home, for the rest of his life he suffered the cruel after effects of mustard gas. When he received a military medal through the post one day, Valmai had clear memories of him throwing it across the room and cursing. When he returned from the war, he boarded with the Mitchell family in Charters Towers. Remember the Mitchells? That's the female side of the family. And he was destined to fall in love with the youngest daughter, Clara. They all moved to Brisbane, and Richard and Clara were married in the Congregational Church at South Brisbane on the 15th of May, 1920. 2 years later, Valmai was born, and then Keith. Uncle Keith is here today. In 1929, can I say? Too late. 21. That was Valmai. 22 she was. And Kevin in 1935. My glasses aren't helping me. Sadly, Kevin passed away several years ago. His daughter Nicole, I waved to earlier, is here today with her mum Judy, my auntie Judy. And Judy has a son, John, as well, who was named for my dad. So I've always thought that was really special. Oh, and Uncle Kevin, your wife Margaret's here. Where's Auntie Margaret? Oh, way down there, Auntie Margaret, with my cousin Karen and Paul. Leaving mining and the war behind, Mum's father went to work for the gas company. He had a little car, and Uncle Keith was able to help me remember. Mum telling me the story. It was a little whippet. And occasionally he'd be called out on jobs and Mum would get to go along, which was very exciting. And Uncle Keith remembers going for little jaunts to Clontarf and places like that. I brought a picture because I wanted to know what a whippet looked like. I just remembered, that's a whippet. Visual aids. The Trembaths were a musical lot, which probably doesn't surprise you, does it? Uncle Bertie, Valmai's uncle, became a dentist, which is not a far departure from mining. And then in his part-time, he was also a band leader and choir conductor, quite a famous one, up in Townsville for many years. Val's dad was proficient on the piano, of course, and that is where she was introduced to the Ivories, and she would talk about sitting at his side playing duets very fondly. Made my little heart hurt. and that is how her mind was opened up to the joys of melody and song. But Richard's health continued to deteriorate throughout Valmai's childhood, and ultimately he died at home in her arms at the age of 43. Valmai was 15, with two little brothers, Keith, who was 8, and Uncle Kevin was just 2, and their mother was very ill. It was 1937, the time of the Great Depression, and Valmai, like many others, was forced to grow up much too soon. The family continued to live in their home at Alderley. Valmai's younger school years were spent at Newmarket, still there today. My sisters and I all went to Newmarket. It's a family tradition. And there was a centenary a couple of years ago that we were able to take Mum to, where many of the oldies had gathered. And we've got photographs of Mum being the sprightliest of them all. We were quite proud of her, and we really enjoyed the day with our memories of Newmarket School. After that, she went to State Commercial High School, completed her final exams in 1938, 1 year after her father's death. She did very well at school, as she would quickly tell you, and in her public service examinations of those days, she placed 39th in the state of Queensland. Now, we always heard that it was a slightly different number to that, but we have the paperwork. We're happy with 39th, I think. The other side of Val's family were the Mitchells. Her mother, Clara, was the youngest of 3 sisters, all born in Charters Towers, moved to Brisbane with their mother after their father passed away around 1920. They were a family of seamstresses, and that skill has passed on through the family as well. Clara was the only one of the 3 to marry. The other 2 were really secondary victims of the Great War. I moved into their house for a few years with my family after they had passed away, and I found an old suitcase, and I was about to toss it away. I opened it, it was full of old photographs and postcards from France from a fiancé who never came back. And that explains so much to us about one of our aunties, who was always a little sad and cranky and a bit scary. But Clara married Richard. Okay, let me find my place. Oh, when the time came, the aunties put their sewing skills to good use and concocted Valmai's wedding dress. You have to remember it was wartime, so money was scarce, fabrics were scarce. And it was a vision in ivory satin with 327 covered buttons down the back, and something that few people could ever afford it in those days unless you had aunties with skills. It was a great blessing. And I imagine it must have been a bittersweet experience for them, these spinster aunts making a wedding dress for their only niece. But they did it with love and did a beautiful job. You'll get to see that dress. Prior to getting married, Valmai worked at state stores, the commissariat stores in Brisbane City. She was proficient, intelligent and articulate and enjoyed her time there, and she spoke fondly of all her friends at state stores. But the Second World War had begun and tightening belts was on again. Valmai had a cousin, Bill, who played a crucial role in Valmai and my father's whole story. And his son is here today, also Bill. There's a Bill Trembath on every branch of our family tree. And on some branches there's more than one. So we're happy to have Bill with us today. Let me tell you about the matchmaking that went on. Oh, before the matchmaking, I have to tell you that cousin Bill played the piano accordion. And if you knew my dad, he liked motorbikes. Cousin Bill would sit pillion on the back of the motorbike, and they'd go through town playing the piano accordion. Sitting backwards. Through Bill, Valmai met our dad. They were friends, John Edward Brummel. And although it was still wartime, they decided to get married. It was at the Baptist Church at Enoggera, which is no longer there, up on top of the hill. It's been replaced with a new building. And it was just a block away from where Mum grew up all her life. And that was the 29th of January 1944. Not 1994, like we mistakenly put on the slideshow. If that's the only mistake you come across today, it'll be a miracle. As a side note, Wednesday last week, the day before Mum passed, was the 29th of January. And if my dad had lived, it would have been their 70th wedding anniversary. And the next day, the very next morning, is when she passed on. When Dad died, he was 60. We had the service here. And then the very next year, Valmai's mum, Clara, passed away. Valmai had a lot of traumas in her life. We all get our share, but I think she had more than her share. I don't know if you know, before me there was another sister who didn't live, and her name was Wendy. She's on the list. I just like to give her a mention. It would have been nice to have another one in between our little group. Back to matchmaking. Valmai had a good friend at State Stores, and her name was Mary Holland. And Val introduced Mary to her cousin Bill. And it wasn't long before the two couples, John and Valmai, Mary and Bill, became a force to be reckoned with. And I've already told you the pillion story, and that cousin Bill is here today. We used to call Bill Little Bill because his dad was Big Bill. How old were you when you outgrew your dad? Probably about 14. And then Little Bill became Big Bill, and vice versa. It was very confusing. But we, as the next generation, appreciate those days when our parents were young and enjoyed life and had good friends and had good experiences, which all led to us being here today. I'll pass to the next person. Janie. Didn't have my